Hey guys, it's Xboxer, and I decided to make a video on my pedal board since I've really been spending a lot of time with my musical instruments lately. I've actually been getting back into music since taking a break from it for a few years. I've been playing bass for about 16 years or so, and mostly in cover bands. I've been in a few original bands, but as a lot of people who've been in original bands know that the cover bands pay a lot more. But being a bass player, you're always having to change tunings, playing different bands, jump and play different songs, and you always want to have a little bit of a different sound to whatever the band calls for. And this is actually one of two pedal boards, well, three different effects systems that I use. This one's the first pedal board, and then the other one is a multi-effects board. Most of them are from Digitech, as you can see, and then I have my rack unit up on the top, which I'll go over in just a moment. So this is the most recent pedal board that I just built. I actually had a lot of these pedals years ago, but I sold them off because I didn't need them at the time. But since this is the X series from Digitech, they're no longer made, but they're still a very respectable pedal series. And the only thing that I see a lot of people that will rag on them for is that they have terrible battery life, which if you're going to be using pedals at all, especially live, you got to be running a power supply. And for the power supply, you can't really see it, but it's the Godlike Power All brick. So it's good to up to 2,000 milliamps, that's 2 amps, and each of these pedals are a high amperage draw even when they're not engaged. I think they're about 4.8 watts a piece. That's somewhere around 300 to 400 milliamps a piece at peak draw. I actually did a clamp meter on this, and with all of them engaged with the settings that I have, I was and also powering an active direct box, and then a Sabine tuner, and then this, which is just for the light, the Loopmaster true bypass pedal. I was only pulling about 0.715 amps, which is not bad at all considering. But I guess it's the peak draw is what the 4.8 watts is referring to per pedal. So most of these pedals I just have to have, but I do need when I need them, I have them. I'm going to start off with where it's on the beginning here. I use the True Bypass from Loopmaster to run. I use it as a muting pedal. So then with the light on, it sends the signal over to the tuner, so I can check my tuning silently. I don't need to play that through the amp. And then when it's off, then it runs it through the chain. This chain starts from here and then crawls up that way, and then goes to the output here in stereo. And then I have a stereo direct box from Samson with link throughout here, so that this goes straight up to the front of the amplifier. Not often that I get to go and play in stereo, but it is good to have, especially if you're playing like an acoustic type of gig where you want to have that extra ambience, and then the digiverb, the digital reverb, really does sound crisp and clean when you play through a PA system with my 4-string acoustic bass. Oh, here's the bass synth wah. This is probably the most expensive. At least it's still retaining its value after they've been discontinued. It's a really nice pedal. I really do like playing with this when I'm just playing around, just not really doing noodling around, really. And then it goes into the bass squeeze, which this is probably the least liked pedal from all the reviews that I've read. I think it has a lot to do with two limitations. One, a lot of people don't understand that the low band and the high band, when they're all the way counterclockwise and this is all the way up, that's unity gain. And as you turn them counterclockwise, there's a lot of boost on the high, and then a little bit less on the low end. Then you can adjust your crossover frequency that way. The other limitation of this pedal is that the input does not have as much dynamic range. So in this case, with my new Hayden 5-string bass with the double humbuckers, the output on this bass is hot. I don't know the exact dBu level that it pushes out, but it definitely can potentially overdrive the input on this, and you get that digital clipping sound. I just have to roll back the volume on this bass especially so that it doesn't clip, but this can more than make up for the gain on the output side. The bass driver is pretty nice. Again, it's not really used that often, but it's great to have. I just kind of keep it on a mild overdrive tone, just so I can cut through if I ever wanted to do a specific bass line that required it. And, you know, again, this is more for kicks. Next thing is the bass multi-chorus. This is probably the most expensive compared with this one. This one I use quite often because every bass player needs a chorus, and this is a very nice thick chorus. This is definitely one of my main pedals, and I'd say I keep this on once I've set it correctly, but this is definitely the pedal that I use most. After the chorus, since we're into the modulation effects, we go up to a lot of the extra stuff that I don't really use that often, but it's just fun to play with. I have my stereo phaser, which again, you know, unless I'm trying to play like Michael Anthony, you know, that's really the only time I ever play around with this pedal. Same thing with the turbo flanger. Again, it's just something I got these pedals for very cheap. They were in really good shape, you know, didn't really use too much. Digidelay, again, is another one of those flavor pedals where you don't really use them that much, but it's always good to have. The digital reverb is actually a pedal that I keep on all the time when I'm playing my acoustic gigs. It really does add that extra ambience, and it has stereo output, and I use the stereo output if I wanted to go to an XLR out to the PA. It's really good if you want to pan each channel hard left and right, and you really get to hear the ambience trying to add to the overall sound with an acoustic setup. So that's really the basic setup of this pedal board. I don't take advantage of the stereo out of the modulation effects. There's really no need unless I was really wanting that. A lot of times if I'm in the studio, I don't even use this pedal. I just use the effects that the studio will use. So moving on from the pedal board here, now this is my rack unit, and this is probably the unit that I've used the most over the past 6 years or so. The main reason being that it's a hell of a lot more convenient and that it's up on top of the stack here. I'm using the PV Max 700 bass amplifier. It's a damn heavy amplifier. I've showed this in previous videos with my Tiger Claw inverter. This is your typical Class AB design. It's very... Did I mention it was heavy? It's very heavy, but it's been with me for over 10 years now, and it's done me very well. But where I've actually augmented that, since this is there's not really a lot of character for this amplifier. I think it's actually pretty dry, but that's not a bad thing. I really got into that phase where I was playing around with the different emulators and the different simulation cabinets and all those different pedals and effects, and I just got tired of it. But this was a good straight up power amp. It's one of the few power amps that I know that can actually run stable at 2 ohms without shutting down. This runs at 700 watts at 2 ohms or 475 watts at 4 ohms, which is perfect for running the PV410 TVX and then my 1x15 TVX. That's with the Tolex on it. I've had to replace one speaker, as you could tell. This cabinet weighs a metric ton. I hate moving it around, and oftentimes I don't really use it other than when I'm playing with the full band because it does weigh about 110 pounds. The 15 is a good, I think it's a 300 watts continuous. I don't know the exact spec, but that is a very nice, true, old school bass sound with the 15. Doesn't have a horn, but it is ported on the bottom. And again, runs very well, and I've had this stacked for maybe about 10, 11 years now. Getting back to the rack unit here, decided to do the basic stuff with the Furman power conditioner. It's an M8D. This really, it helps with just having the, knowing the voltage, making sure that you're at least 115 volts or better. Anything below 115 volts, I do notice that, especially the amplifier starts to, you don't have maximum output here. But it's just always good to have. It's got the pull-out lights and whatnot. It does offer a basic EMI RFI filtering, but it is not the best, and I don't think that the Merit series from Furman was designed for that. If you're getting that kind of noise in the lines, you're probably needing something a lot better, but I haven't really run into that in recent years. Moving down the next rack unit here is the SansAmp RPM. This is actually the same preamp that Geddy Lee from Rush uses. It is very, very versatile. It's got the mid shift and a blend, so you get to it's a mid frequency shift. You can change the center frequency and the boost and cut. These boost and cuts, bass treble and mid, are actually very, very sensitive. A little goes a long way. And I usually keep the drive a little bit at, say, 9, 10 o'clock, and same thing with the blend, just to get that mild transistor overdrive. It's a good tube emulation sound, not perfect, but it's still very, very close to my ears. I've played through tube amps before, but always found that the reliability was more questionable. But hey, if you can afford a tube amp, go for it. The next is the rack unit it's a Lexicon MX200. This is what I replaced my multi-effects board with years ago when I stopped playing with it. I had a couple people that were not really good with their drinks, spilt beer all over the multi-effects board, almost shorted out a $500 board at the time, and decided to move everything off of the floor and onto the rack. I used the foot switch on the bottom here to do the 2 effects banks, and I just keep basic compression and chorus on there. The chorus is not as lush as the Digitech multi-bass chorus on my other pedal board, but it gets the job done. And of course you got your DTR2 Korg tuner. I have an Audio-Technica, I forget, this is the R3100 series with the body pack right here. This is probably the best wireless I've ever had. It's been with me for about 6-7 years, really runs well. And then finally, this is the 482 Sonic Maximizer BBE. A lot of people hate on this because they think it's just a glorified EQ. In a way it is, the low contour and then process, so basically you have a low and a high. But what it's actually doing is that just the nature of a speaker, and I don't know how well I can explain it, but I know that it does bring some crispness back to the sound, and the plucking of your right hand, if you're playing, it does bring more of that character of the string out. A little bit more than what an EQ is doing, but I really don't play around with this much. I got this because someone had told me years ago that it was a good thing to have for your bass rig. I haven't had any complaints since having it. Now the interesting thing about the routing and how the effects unit is, so the RPM has an effects loop in the back, and then I also use it for I use the 2 banks independently. So the first bank is the compression, which I actually put on the front of the amplifier. So it'll actually go through the effects loop on the first bank. And then on the second bank, it actually will go on the output. So the output of the RPM will go through the second bank, and then the second bank will then run down to the Sonic Maximizer, which then goes to the output here. So I have 2 different banks that are affected at different points in the chain. Most of the time it is just compression so I can control my signal better, and then the modulation will be in the effects loop towards the end of the chain here. And finally, just to quickly touch upon is it's the Multitrack Recorder and multi-effects board that I was using for a number of years. There's the it's from Digitech as well. It's the Digitech BNX3, similar to the GNX3, and this is the carry case with it. I've used this for a number of years, and unfortunately, it caught the wrong end of a couple beer glasses and got beer spilt all over it, and got into the pedals and whatnot. I washed it out and didn't turn it on for a week, and somehow or another it miraculously turned back on. Since then I really haven't used it too much. I still have it because I'll never be able to get my money back for it, but it's still in really good condition. I even got the extra foot controller to run the 8-track recorder. The problem with the 8-track recorder is that they use what are called smart media cards, which had a max capacity of 128 megabytes. That's enough for when you're looping and doing some quick phrases and whatnot, but it was a dinosaur. It just was never supported after that, and there was no other cards made larger than 128 megabytes, and the architecture was very unreliable. There was a lot of corrupt reads and cards needing to be reformatted all the time. They came out with XD cards later from Olympus, or I forget. I think that's the name of the company that used to make them. But now that's a dead format too. You can actually buy an adapter for that, and I have all that. I just don't really use it don't use it much at all anymore. So I hope this video was helpful, and if there's any questions, please let me know. I don't see the point in doing any type of sound demos of what I have here. I mean, there's plenty of videos on YouTube already for that. But if there's any questions on how this is set up and Feel free to leave a comment in the description down below. And cheers. But there's one more thing I want to mention before I go, is that this particular foot switch that we see here, it's the FSC 385. They came with latching switches originally, and the Lexicon couldn't take that. So I decided to change it to momentary on switches. So it's off and then on, but it's not latching. And that allowed me to change the banks here on the Lexicon. So if I do the first bank and then the second bank, you can see the bypass lights coming on. So that was the only modification I did. I think there's actually a foot switch for this, but I didn't bother buying it because it was too expensive. You know, I bought that one for like 30 bucks, and it was a lot cheaper compared. And it's also a lot cheaper if something were to spill upon it. I can replace a $30 foot switch a hell of a lot easier than a $400 multi-effects pedal board. As always, thank you for watching, and cheers.